Stay more comfortable, more concealed, and in the stand longer with Osseo gear. Premium camouflage apparel created for bow hunters by bow hunters. Osseo's revolutionary patented camo patterns and innovative features are designed to keep whitetail bow hunters totally invisible and dead quiet. Elevate your game with Osseo. Visit asiogear.com and take 20% off your purchase with code TRUTH20. Hey folks, I want to take a minute to give you a heads up about Tethered's latest gear. If you're serious about staying mobile in the woods, you've got to check this stuff out. Now, I've been using their Ultra Lock saddle, and now the SD saddle is available. And let me tell you, this thing is dialed. It's ultra light, super adjustable, and most importantly, it's comfortable. You're not going to be shifting around up in the tree wondering if your legs are going to fall asleep. Pair that with the Predator V platform, which is stable, lightweight, and has an angled front edge for comfort. This thing will give you plenty of room for those critical moments when you need to make a move on a deer. And if you're like me and you spend long hours in the tree, you'll appreciate the new Predator CFX platform. Carbon fiber construction that keeps it light, but tough enough to handle whatever you throw at it. This is the kind of gear that makes a difference when you're out there all day. And listen, if you're always juggling your gear like I am, Tethered's got you covered with the Universal Platform Pack. More rigid to make getting your platform in and out easier, and 2 sizes to fit the smaller and larger platforms. Whether you're hunting public land or heading to your favorite spot on the back 40, this setup makes carrying your platform so much easier. So if you're serious about getting in the game this season and hunting smarter, check out Tethered at tethered.com. Their gear will keep you lighter, quieter, and up in the tree longer, which, as we all know, is where the magic happens. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have on a fella that I'm going to try not to butcher your name. I usually ask people before I start, but I'm pretty sure I got this one. I'm confident, man. I think it's Tony Van Asten, right?
Yep.
Nailed it. How about that? How you doing, buddy?
Doing really good. Thanks for having me on.
Good, man. We were just chopping it up beforehand, some like valuable life lessons of not fighting people with crooked noses and cauliflower ear before we started recording. I feel like those are good, valuable life lessons that we could pass on to listeners, right?
Yeah, that is a good lesson. I mean, don't take place with some guys with crooked noses and cauliflower ears. So.
Yeah, exactly, man. So we were getting everything scheduled and stuff like that, and we shifted the time and stuff. And I always forget, whenever I'm, putting things on calendars, that not everybody lives on the East Coast, right? So it's just like a bad habit of mine. I'm always like, 5:30, 6 o'clock, and they're like, yeah, and it's like, and then I realize like the person's like, doesn't live, in Pennsylvania. So before we get started and kind of jump into things, man, let everyone know, where you're from and what you do for a living as a just a little bit of background.
Yeah, I'm from Wisconsin, northeastern, kind of like eastern part of the state near Green Bay. Okay. I do sewer and water work, so which is really nice because we start slowing down like around like winter, like December-ish, and then we're usually like starting to wrap up around Christmas. Some years we've gone like into January, but so like if you're not working in the shop or whatever in the winter, you can just have off, and do whatever you want to do. So it's super nice. So I'm kind of in limbo mode right now, and then we'll start back up like in usually like late February or somewhere around there. So
yeah, I would imagine doing sewer and water work in Wisconsin this time of year has got to be just with the weather in general, right? It's going to be a challenge to try to work around just overall.
Everything is hard in the winter. I mean, the last 2 winters were, we had little stretches of some like brutal weather, but we're pretty mild. Like last December and like last February were like super mild. So right now it's cold. It's like around 5 degrees right now, and it looks like that for quite a while. So
yeah, we've been getting a lot of cold weather here in PA. Like we had unseasonably cold weather, even just this hunting season. It was when I say unseasonably cold, I guess it was like the later part of November. It was, getting days where the highs were like 32 or 33, which for this area is, now I was a little further north than I usually am. So, I guess it was to be expected. It was just a little bit colder, but the temps seem to be a little bit colder. But I'm curious, since you've had more mild winters, and I think we have had too, just here in general, did you notice like a positive impact on just like the deer in general in terms of like their like ability to not have to stress as much, maybe that kind of equals, better antler growth or bigger body deer or whatever, just because they weren't having to kind of weather the storm, if you will?
I do think so. like they're just like in a little bit better shape. Like some of those years, they look like really rough, like in March and April and stuff. But
Hmm.
like from my understanding, the biggest impact is you have to, like 5 years down the road, those like the health of that mother, that doe,
Mm.
while she's pregnant is like the biggest thing. Like a buck's not going to reach his full potential, even though he might have like the best genetics from that doe and that buck. But if it was like a brutal winter, he's never going to reach his full potential. So, I mean,
Yeah.
like you might see like, like 5 years from now, like some really good deer running around from those
Yeah.
two, really mild winters.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I think a lot of times people don't equate the health of the mother as being as important as it is. And like, and
Yeah.
I'm not like any great land manager or anything like that. We had a farm um, back home, a family farm that when I first moved back to Pennsylvania, I did some like work at the farm for my father-in-law and try to help build, create a little bit of a place that essentially could have the best caliber deer we could have for the area that the farm existed in, right? We were never going to have, world-class deer there or anything like that. But it was more just, can we create a herd that produces a few good bucks every year, and things of that nature. And I, before we started doing stuff, I actually was going to some seminars, and listening to some guys just talk about land management and stuff like that. So I wasn't trying to become like the best land manager on the planet, but I was also trying not to screw something up colossally off the rip. You know what I mean? Was really what I was trying to not do. And one of the things I did kind of take away, like one of the big things, and to your point, was how important that first year for that buck fawn is, and the health of that mother is. I forget, they had a statistic for it, the one seminar I went to, and I don't remember exactly what the number was, but it was something pretty significant where it's like, man, the majority of that buck's potential, like whatever he becomes as a 5, 6 year old or whatever, is going to be determined in that the mother's health that first year and her ability to nurse and get him the nutrients and off on a good start is going to
Yeah.
be huge into what he's ultimately going to become.
And that pretty much goes with just about like anything, like human
Yeah.
beings and like
Yeah.
dogs or whatever. Like and like same
Hmm.
with like learning. Like I've heard like a dog like learns almost like there's like 80 or 90% of what he's gonna learn in his entire life in the first like 5 weeks he's alive.
Hmm.
And so it's like hard to train dogs that are, like older they get, the harder they are to like if they're gonna be trained to do something very specific,
Hmm.
it's really hard to train them. I
Yeah.
think
So, I
it's
mean, I
a little
think,
like weird too.
it'd be interesting. I'm thinking of it now, and I've never done this. I'm curious if you've done this. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's like I kind of want to keep record of it to a degree because this past year I was able to chase, well, not probably for certain, the best caliber deer I've ever been able to chase in the state of Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
And I can't remember off the top, and those deer were like 6 years old is what I kind of roughed them at. Um, and now I'm curious if I were to go back 6 years. I can't remember that far back. I can barely remember if I put underwear on the day. But if I could remember back 6 years, I'm curious to think of. I could go back and look at the weather data, of course, but I'm curious to think of whether or not that
So that
winter,
probably would have been like 18 or yeah, they were probably born in
18 or 17, would have been one
okay.
or the other. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, actually, probably yeah, 18. You're right. Yeah, 18.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't think of what the weather was like that winter in 18, if it was a harsh one or not.
I don't remember
But
either.
yeah,
I think
I'm
I
gonna
was
have to do that now.
sleeping around at the time.
That's my homework now is to do
Yeah.
that because now I'm curious because that's a great way to gauge like if you're in an area that can produce good deer, and you go back and you start looking at historical weather data just year over to understand, did these deer have a leg up or not? Did they have a good start or not? And that probably could go a long way to tell you what maybe the top end of what you might have in that particular area on a given year based on the age structure that you might be looking for.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean that also like you hear like all this EHD and stuff and it's terrible that like in places in Iowa and stuff there's all these like deer dying and stuff, but really like you end up with some really high quality deer then like the years following the ones that survive because they're the stress levels have to be like so much less, especially on those does. Like they get really stressed out when you see like these properties with like hundreds and hundreds of deer. Like so it might not be the worst thing in the world. Like some of those bucks come out and there's just like no competition for food and stuff, and they're probably just in way better health.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's the silver lining of it, right? Is that
Mhm.
you reduce the overall kind of impact of the landscape, and the deer that are making it through typically, oftentimes are the stronger of the deer,
Yeah.
right? Just the more capable of the deer, and so I'm not a biologist, don't pretend to be one, but maybe you're perpetuating the better gene pool, right? That has the ability
Mhm.
to kind of
We might
stave
be talking
off.
out of our ass here. I don't
Could
know.
totally be talking out of our ass. You know what I mean? Nice, man. So let's go to some places where we're not talking out of our ass. So, man, I'm always curious, dude, about people's stories. Just you're from Wisconsin, which I kind of guessed that just by the nature of like some of the stuff I've watched of you and like where you hunt. Where I kind of gathered that you hunt, or shouldn't say where, but like the type of terrain and stuff that you're hunting. But I'm always curious how people get into hunting. I always kind of say when I ask this question, I always kind of preface it by saying, I'm from PA, huge hunting heritage state. I know Wisconsin is too.
Yeah.
It was like I had, a gun in my hand to go rifle hunting.
Yeah.
The day I was born, essentially, it was predetermined.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious. So for me, it was, that was how it started. But I didn't really get into bow hunting until I probably got into until I turned like 30 because I didn't have any bow hunters around me as I was growing up. So I found it kind of later in life. And that's kind of like my short version of my story. But I'm curious for you, man. How did you get started hunting? Was it similar to mine or different? And, what kind of got you to like the passion point that you're at now?
But yeah, same thing. Like I started, everyone, such a tradition-rich like state like Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, PA.
Mhm.
That's just what you do. Like my dad wasn't like a big hunter or anything, but everyone went. And like he would go opening weekend and stuff. And my uncles and my grandpa they were always big into hunting and stuff. But so I started hunting like in the North Woods in Wisconsin when I was 12, gun hunting, and then not many deer up there at all. I think it's getting better, but um, and then I just loved it so much. And like when I went gun hunting, we would go and sit like dark to dark, 12 years old, like I wouldn't see a deer for like a week. And I still loved it. And I bought just piece of crap bow when I was like maybe 15, and I started bow hunting, had no idea like what I was doing at all. Like the equipment was so terrible too. And this is like when you see like these hunting shows on TV once in a while, and they're just so like generic.
Hmm.
Guys on some ranch like cracking antlers together and like shooting a big buck. And I got this climbing tree stand. I couldn't even drive at the time, but my buddy could. We went out to this piece of public. I was just wearing jeans and a flannel and had my new bow, and I had one of those little rattle bags. I climbed up in a tree. It must have been like during the rut. Did my little rattle bag, and literally in the first like 2 minutes, I had a buck like run right to the base of my tree, and I just winged an arrow at him, like, and it ricocheted off some buck. But yeah, I just learning as I go, and fortunate to have like some really close friends that were like big into hunting, and
Hmm.
we were always fishing down at the river and just always doing stuff outside. So
Right. That's awesome, man. It's when we think back on some of the silly stuff that we did or some of just like, the asinine things you did because you just didn't know any better, but man, you were
yeah.
having fun. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like I remember as a kid, like we didn't have, uh, again, I gun hunted just all as a kid, all growing up. We didn't have tree stands. Like we never had like elevated setups or anything like that. Like my dad, it was always ground hunting all the time. Like that was the only way we
Yeah.
ever hunted was
Were you
either
guys
we,
hunting in the hills though, like in the
yeah,
there?
yep,
Yeah. So I mean, it would have been kind of senseless a lot of times to even. There's so many places that you could probably hunt from, like
yeah.
on a hill or whatever.
Yep, exactly. It was a lot of just like you would set up on the top of a ridge somewhere where you could see to the bottom, essentially watch a creek bottom, watch like a draw that ran through the property or whatever the case was. But I always heard of people hunting out of trees,
You know what I mean? And it was just like the weirdest thing to me. So I built this platform. I had no clue what it even looked like. You know what I mean? I had like no clue like how high you're supposed to be. I was like, oh, you can get up in a tree. Like,
Yeah.
and so in my mind, I was like 12 or 13. I was like, oh, it must be kind of like a tree house. So I
Yeah.
built like a platform between these 4 pine trees, and it was crooked as shit, you know, and it was maybe only 4 foot off the ground, you know,
Uh,
and like I think my friend ended up nicknaming it the Crooked Mother, you know, that
yeah.
was the nickname. And my dad still to this day brings it up because it was not in a good spot. It was literally in the middle of this like pine thicket, like he couldn't see anything. Like it was, but that was like, you know, I was a kid and I was like, man, I'm gonna build me a stand right there, you know.
That's
Um,
sweet.
but that's how you get started, man. You start the trial and error, you know, like
Yeah.
we were talking about before, like hard things, you know, you don't do these things if they're easy, right? It's
Yeah.
like, you know, you try to find something that piques your interest, that challenges you, and then you try to figure out ways to overcome it. Mine was building a piece of crap stand in a pine thicket, you know, and,
Yeah.
and then off from there, you know.
Hmm.
But so man, when you think back, you know, you have that old bow, you're winging arrows, right, and getting started, you know, what was like some of the early influences for you, like that started kind of shaping like your ability to actually go from winging arrows to like, okay, I'm now like encountering deer to like, okay, now I'm starting to kill deer, right? Like, what was that kind of like? Who were those influences, or how did that start to kind of take shape?
Well, some of the guys that like I would go to deer camp with, like friends of my dad, like guys that he went to high school with, they were like some seriously like good woodsmen and stuff.
Mm,
And I was always like so just like intrigued by that, like how they would. This is before like no one had cell phones or
mm,
before trail cameras or any of that stuff. And I was just like so like blown away, like how they would like give you directions and like in these huge blocks of timber, like I'm talking like millions. I don't know how many millions of acres are up there, but a lot. And so I was like drawn to it by that. But when I was really getting into hunting, like when I was like through going through high school, and then I went in the Marine Corps, so I was, had a break from hunting. I think I maybe hunted a couple times, like when I
mm,
got a chance to come home, but um, so I didn't, I had 4 or 5 years there, like where I wasn't able to do that. And when I was in the Marine Corps, I went through sniper school and that, so I like learned a lot about how to become like a good bow hunter. Like, I just hadn't known it yet,
mm-hmm,
and I just wanted to hunt like how you see on TV and like have my piece of private land and do all the food plots and all that stuff is fine and dandy. But
mm-hmm,
I had a lease with some buddies and I learned a lot on that place. Um, but I ended up losing that lease because the guy ended up selling that property, and it was probably like the best thing that's ever happened to me as like in terms of hunting because that's like when I actually started to get like a lot better at hunting and like using some of the skills that like I had and actually like understanding like what these deer are actually doing. You just need to be outside of your little bubble of your property and see just tons of different scenarios and different properties and hunting out of state and I mean even hunting different. I haven't really done any other hunts, but like if you go out west and hunt elk or
mm.
whatever, like you learn things that you can apply like back home too.
Yeah.
So,
Man, that's such a good like for people who are maybe younger or newer to hunting listening. Like, it's such a good lesson because I've talked about this with my buddy Tony, who he's from Minnesota, but he hunts a lot in Wisconsin and stuff as well. Great hunter, um, and he always kind of gives the advice of like, look, hunt wherever you can hunt, like just hunt, first and foremost. But it's like if you really want to start to like understand, and even if you want to go hunt, like continue to hunt your back 40 or whatever you have access to, like absolutely. But if you really want to kind of start to expand your horizons and start to dial your game for even if you're hunting like a back 40 or a lease, like just go hunt other places like public
talking
lands.
about Tony Peterson.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he's always talking about pheasants and
Yeah.
Learn stuff
Yeah.
from your pheasant hunting or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And so he and I, like, we've talked a lot about that, just about how much getting outside of like what makes you, it's kind of the force multiplier of what you already know, because it starts to kind of, like anything, right? I'm sure, like, when you're going through sniper school, I'm sure, you're doing certain types of exercises or drills. And part of it is to gain proficiency, but part of it is also probably to kind of expose where you need work, right? Like that's most things you do, right? It's like you do things, you have like a positive thing of like, hey, this happened well, so great, we're proficient. Here are some areas that you still have some gaps that we need to fill. And to me, like when you're traveling to hunt or if you're hunting places you're unfamiliar with and stuff like that, that's really what that does. It absolutely illuminates the things you're actually pretty good at, and certainly shines a huge spotlight on the things where you're lacking,
Yep.
So did you kind of find the same thing? Is that kind of how you started to really like get into your groove, if you will?
Yeah. I always am thinking I know something or like I'm ahead of the game, and then a lot of times it'll be like a year or 2 or 3, 4 years later where I'm like, I had no idea like what I thought, like I kind of knew a little bit, and then I kind of lucked out, and then I'm like, I always wish I knew, oh man, I wish I knew that back then or whatever. And
Yeah.
every year you're just like adding to, your resume of how to get
Yeah.
on big deer, and
Yeah.
it's easier and easier every year, but it's still, and deer bucks can be so different from each other too, especially like in different places. Like I hunted Iowa this year, and there's like a little bit of a learning curve, like with how the pressure is. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of pressure where I was at, but it's a lot of like squirrel hunting pressure and stuff, so it's a little different kind of pressure, and like
Mm-hmm.
but yeah,
And
the
talk about,
deer react differently and stuff like that. So
yeah, I was going to say, talk about that a little bit, man. Cause I think, for people, listening, I think a lot of times, people think deer are deer, right? And then there's a little bit of truth to that, right? It's like if you're going somewhere new, and like the advice I always give someone that maybe they're traveling out of the state for the first time, I'm like, look, don't complicate it. Like, what deer like to do. Deer like to do the same things in these other places. They like to follow edge, if there's a good acorn crop or whatever the case is, whatever time of the year you're going, like they still have the same basic needs. And so you can find deer. So first things first, just use that and find deer. And then if you're trying to find specific types of deer, it's like, well, then you got to start to like dissect like the place that you're at a little bit and understand like how they're behaving a little bit differently or whatever the case is. Like I totally saw that from like the places I hunted to even Iowa or Ohio or wherever, right? So what was the big thing that was different for you going from Wisconsin to Iowa?
well, I'm from the other side of Wisconsin, but I had the last like 3 or 4 years I had been hunting in western Wisconsin in the hills. So like in the Mississippi River corridor, there's it's really steep country there. Some spots more so than others, but really I was hunting. I mean, I could like see places that I hunt in Wisconsin from where I was hunting in Iowa. I was right, the same exact country. I mean, some of the deer I was just talking to my buddy on the phone today actually, and we were like, dude, it's not that far fetched to like you could kill one of the deer on some of these Iowa properties, like where we're hunting in Wisconsin. Like all they have to do is just swim this little bit and then go island to island, and they're right there,
Right.
But so there's which is what makes Iowa so crazy. It's like, I mean, we have really good deer in Wisconsin, don't get me wrong, and some giant bucks, but the caliber of deer in Iowa is, I mean, I've, been in Iowa plenty of times, so like I knew, I had a high expectations, and I knew I was gonna, have a lot of pictures of big deer and see some big deer, but there are so many giant deer. It's like you enter a different world there. So it was cool seeing, like how these bucks, like, especially because their gun season is like way later, so you get to see the full extent of like the actual rut, and like,
Yeah.
there's no interference with like gun hunting and stuff, and how they react to pressure, which in Wisconsin we open up earlier. Like our bow season is mid-September, and
Okay.
I was October 1st.
Mm-hmm.
So So I think it's actually kind of nice because the deer have like a little bit of a they react. It takes like maybe like 10 days, 2 weeks to they like that pressure hits them, and then they start to change. You know, you have in Iowa like they don't really they start to like react to that little bit of pressure when their archery season opens, and then boom, like they're going into like the pre-rut, and it's like they're off and running, and it's like there's no, like lag time really.
There's no warm up,
Yeah,
or very
I
little
mean,
warm up.
there's the squirrel hunting starts September 1st, and I had never in my life seen any like we have a lot of squirrel hunters in Western Wisconsin, like a lot, and I had never seen anything like this in my life. I'm talking like the parking lots, there'd be like on Labor Day weekend, there'd be 20 trucks in every parking lot, and they're all camping out. There's fires
Wow.
going. I was blown
For squirrel
away.
hunting.
They're all from Minnesota. There's no Iowa guys there, and the Iowa like locals do not like it at all.
Oh, I bet.
Which I
Yeah.
don't blame them, and it drastically changes properties. It's wild. So, I was kind of like going all in and like on some areas, that I wanted to just, stick to. And I really had to like change a lot of things because of the squirrel hunting pressure and stuff. It was
That's
crazy.
crazy, man, that they have that much squirrel hunting pressure. Like I would have never.
I still can't believe it.
I would never. I mean, I have, around me locally, it's like I'll get, some small game pressure, like, every now and then. And most of the places I'm hunting is usually like some mountain hill type of country to where it's like, there's not a lot of places where people are going to be hunting pheasants or, anything like that. But there are a couple places, and like a guy might bring a dog through. They might be chasing rabbits or whatever. It happens occasionally. Swamps that I'll hunt, like sometimes you'll get some like duck hunters and stuff like that that you have to kind of work around. Funny story, I got shot at by a duck hunter one day. Got actually hit with the pellets in the tree. Like he had no clue I was there, and like turned around and boom, and just like sprayed me down. Yeah, it was. I flashed at him, like he came in the morning, and I flashed my light at him, like so I was like pretty sure he knew I was there. And I just think he just didn't care. He thought he was far enough away that it wasn't going to bother me. And I just like let one eat. So yeah, it was. I got down after that and left. I was like, yeah, I'm out of here. This isn't good.
Crazy.
Yeah. But yeah, I've never. And then whenever you get out into like the plain states, like you certainly get like people who are chasing roosters and stuff like that. But and that's bananas out there. Like that's like they do that more than they bow hunt deer. Like it's like the Wild West. But squirrel hunting, like that's wild.
And the deer, like they know, like there's the types of pressure, like they know they don't like when someone's like slinking through the woods, like creeping through the woods to like bow hunting. And if you are like walking with your buddy, just like shed hunting or just blasting through the woods, like they're way less likely for that to like affect them at all. Like they'll be right back in there. They hear you and see you from a ways away, like that doesn't bother them at all. But it's when they get the shit scared out of them, like by a squirrel hunter, or a lot of times the movement, like those squirrel hunters, they're not like running some of those deer off the property, but they're just like hanging, they're like hunkered down, like hanging tight, because they're like those are the guys just creeping through the woods and like looking up in the trees. But a lot of times those are the guys seeing like giant bucks too. So I would suggest, I know a lot of people don't get along with the squirrel hunters and stuff, but some of those guys are actually really good hunters. And if I like see, a lot of times I just see a guy, like a younger guy or whatever by himself, I'll go up to him and talk to him. And I've learned a lot about big deer from squirrel hunters.
Really?
Like, they'll pull out their phone. They have like pins on their onyx, like squirrel pins.
Right.
And he'll be like
squirrel pins.
I don't know.
Squirrel pins are great.
All over. I'm like, how long? I mean, you're driving down like these gravel roads. There's squirrels literally in the roads, like everywhere. And then you'll get these guys at like cracking daylight, like 2 miles back on a piece of public. I'm like, this guy must have left at 4 o'clock in the morning to get back there.
To get them squirrels, son. Yeah, man. I ain't getting up early for squirrels. It's like I'm sleeping in. I'm gonna have my coffee and like I might hit the woods around noon. It's like if I'm gonna
change on the map, like where they're jumping big deer and stuff.
Wow.
And a lot of times you can like learn a lot from these guys.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's, I think one of the great takeaways from that kind of suggestion is, you can either tackle things one of two ways, right? You can see people who are there hunting squirrels, or if they're hunting small game, whatever they're hunting, right? And you can see it as a negative and be mad about it, right? Or you can look at it and go, well, what's the opportunity here, right? And you can ask them some questions. Hey, you've seen any deer? Because most of the time, if they're not hunting what you're hunting, they don't care. They'll talk to you about it. Like my buddy Chad and I, when we were out in the plains hunting, the first week we were there, it was, rooster season wasn't in yet, or pheasant season wasn't in yet. And then the second week it comes, that we were there, it came in, and we knew that. And so we kind of really busted our rear end trying to make something happen that first week. A couple close calls, didn't make it happen. And so we knew we were going to be in that second week where it's like the weekend was going to be bananas. The week was probably going to be mornings and evenings type of thing, right? We'll have to hunt around some pheasant hunters and stuff. And so what we ended up doing that first weekend, I mean, there were just pheasant hunters everywhere. So we found a group of guys that looked like they were out to have a good time, and we just drove up to them and said, hey, we've been bow hunting some of these areas. And it was just a ton of CRP and stuff like that. And we were like, you guys going to go flush these areas out? And they were like, yep. We're like, all right, great. We're like, do you mind if we just follow you? And we're going to actually set up in glass and watch you. And he's like, no, that's fine. And I was like, we're going to follow you around for the morning until you guys are done. Because what we really wanted to do was see if we could lay eyes on a big deer that they kick up from somewhere, and be able to pin him down and be like, all right, he's going to come back because they're not bothering him, and basically use that as our strategy, was to use them to basically try to push deer to find them and then go back and hunt them. That was the idea. So similar idea where it was like we took a bad situation, tried to make it the best out of it that we could,
I do the same thing. Like in Western Wisconsin, there's places that are like, I know for a fact, like these places get pounded on. I don't know if it's like the same, traditions of like with those guys is like their whole family is out there squirrel hunting or whatever. But there's like several properties that I know that get hit really hard, and there's a few places that, like one of the properties that it traditionally has at least one, usually a few like giant bucks on it. And there's like several like really good escape routes in there where anytime like one of those giant bucks gets jumped, he's crossing a ditch in like one of like 2 or 3 spots. And like it's a good opportunity to kill a really big buck. It's like almost like a deer drive, like you have to be there before they get there, and there's a lot of like ifs there too, but
that just goes into like your scouting, like all your postseason and scouting and understanding where you're hunting. It's like if you know an area is going to get driven, and a big deer likes to live in it, and there's 2 possible exit routes, and you're like, hey, it's opening Saturday of gun season, the boys are going to be out. You know what I mean? It's like
that takes time. Like that's why you're at such a huge advantage to like just hunting, around like where you live, or like in a place that you've known for a long time. Like when you're going into Iowa, like it's awesome, but there's still like going to be a little bit of like the basics, like learning, the surroundings of like what's actually like going on. Like you didn't know like this place is going to get driven out on the whatever, this or that, or, and I suggest like anytime you get a chance to like, even if you don't like talking to people or whatever, like go talk to like some of the guys, like the local guys and stuff. Like I talk to everyone I can, and you'll learn like a ton of stuff about like the area and what's, going on. And like I talked to these guys running dogs for coons the other day, and I learned a lot about the whole area and everything, and where all the big deer are and stuff.
You'll be surprised how much people are willing to share. Especially if you come at it the right way. You know what I mean? It's like if you're like, hey, show me some pins worth some big deer, like you're probably going to get a hard no, right? But if you go in with just a natural curiosity of the area. Like I had a similar situation when I was in Iowa. It's like actually the guy's become a good friend of mine now. Met him in a parking lot. We were both hunting the same piece of public, and we came out at the same time. And he's like, man, I see your truck here like every morning early. Like you're beating me to the parking lot every day, And I told him where I was hunting, and he told me where he was hunting, and we weren't messing each other up. And said goodbye to each other and like went on our separate ways. And then like the next day I wrapped up hunting and was stopped at like the gas station, and he was at the gas station, and he was like, hey, started talking. He's like, you seen anything? Like, it's like, no, I think I'm going to change where I'm going. And he actually was like, hey, I've had some really good deer over in this area. He's like, I haven't hunted in a couple years. He's like, but however many years ago, prior to that, he's like, I killed a really good one over there, or he sent his buddy over there and his buddy killed a good one. I think that's what it was. And, he's like, if you haven't yet, you might want to check that out. I was like, actually, when I came out to scout and shed hunt in like March, I was like, I did scout some of that, but I didn't make it over to that area specifically you're talking about. Went over there and like I missed a hammer deer like within the first hour of being on that piece. It was awful. I actually ended up missing that deer a total of 3 times, which was horrible. And ended up killing a deer on the last day, like 40 yards from there. You know what I mean? And so, but it was him kind of like, he didn't give me pins, but he just said, yeah, if you've scouted that, you might want to check out this other side because it's pretty good too. And that was all he told me. And he just kind of helped point me in the right direction, And it's just an example of, make friends with some of the locals. They're not all jerks,
Yeah, I agree. And I wasn't afraid of, I was dumping information to guys there too, like, especially the guys that, like, I'd run into guys from, other states, and there's hardly any, like, Iowa guys actually hunting out there, but some of the guys that are from like flat, I was hunting like in some really steep stuff. Like some of those guys were struggling. I wouldn't suggest like the first you finally get your Iowa tag and you're gonna go hunt that stuff and you have no idea how to hunt in the hills. As good as Iowa is, like that can be tough. So like if you have no idea what you're doing, and so I was like, I wanted these guys to. There's some Minnesota guys from like way up north and pool table flat stuff. And I'm like, well, I would, check this out, like maybe stay away from this. Just stay up high. If you don't know, like just stay up on the tops because it's going to be tough, to try to pull something off like in that where you're talking there. Like, yeah, that's a killer spot to run a camera or whatever, but
right.
You're going to have a hard time there.
Yeah, because a lot of the guys when they go out of state hunts or whatever, especially if there's got a lot of topography to deal with, like they want to hunt in those bottoms, and like it's like you're saying, man. It's like
it looks so cool, and they're deer like going through there, like, and there's a lot of those bottoms that they want to be in, and once in a while you can pull that off if it's the right type of scenario.
Yeah.
But if you're in a killer like spot like that, you kill them up on top.
Yeah, those bottoms are just so. Because I've done it before where it's like I've had a spot where it's like, man, this is just the spot, and I'm like, it's in the bottom, and I know the winds are going to swirl, and it's going to be shitty, and it's like, but I'm just like, and I know in my mind, it's like I know this is not a good idea, and I go and I do it anyway, because I'm like, I just got to try, it's just too good,
I hunted quite a bit of bottoms this year, actually more than I ever have, and a few times where I'm like, damn, I knew that was gonna, that was coming, but. Right. There are a lot, everything has to be perfect on like the wind speed, the sun, time of year, if there's leaves or not, like everything has to be set up just perfectly. And those bucks, those giant old bucks, they've lived there their whole lives and they know when to go down there. They know, all right, it's time for me. Like, it's like almost like a race sometimes down there, like in late October, because it's like, the first one to get down there is going to be able to smell everything first, and then they're off and running, for the night, and
right.
It's just like a big vacuum. It's just like pulling everything down there, and
which is exactly why they're there, and there's probably a huge scrape there. You know what I mean? It's like there's everything there that makes you want to be there, but it's just like you got to fight the I say that
all the time. I know so many guys just want to hunt in the bottoms. I'm like. So you think just randomly this 6-year-old today wants to go on a kamikaze and go commit suicide in the bottom? Like,
right. Yeah.
He's not going to do that.
Right. Exactly. I think there's, obviously, like you said, like there's like every now and then, if you get the right conditions, you can try to pull it off, especially if there's a deer that maybe you can't quite crack his code. And that's maybe the only spot you think that like consistently, like, that he wants to be in. It's like, if you can get the right conditions, and I think, and sometimes those places are hard to hunt, especially if you're talking, just for example, like the up north piece you were talking about earlier, like the Northwoods, right? Like that's a hard place to hunt. It's similar to, not as vast, but like the place I've been hunting up north this year for the deer that I was chasing. I know that it's notoriously a hard place to hunt. It hunts like dog shit in October, you know what I mean? Cause it's big. Yeah. And if you're not right on the deer, you're not going to see anything, right? They don't lay down a ton of sign. But like this year I hunted like, I don't even know how many days in October I hunted. I hunted a pile. Like, I hunted a lot of mornings and a lot of evenings, and I worked from my trailer and just lived up there, slept in my truck, like, to chase this deer. And part of it was because I was like, I just need to spend as much time here as possible. I know.
Push yourself in every aspect of the
Yes.
knowing what is happening around you, like, from the deer to like everything, if
Yes.
something
Yes.
happens, I need to know about it.
Yeah. And it's like, and it was great. Like, I had I mean, look, a lot of the hunts were rough. I mean, I saw a fair amount of deer. I actually saw more deer than I thought I was going to see. And I saw more bucks actually than I thought I was going to see just in general. But my thing was that I can't wait to try to kill this deer till the rut and try to get lucky on a doe bringing him by. I was like, I'm not that lucky. I was like, I don't have that kind of luck. I was like, I got to actually hunt him down if this is going to work.
You have to have a lot of mental fortitude to do that. Like, hunt in a place like that where you can have some really rough, it's tough. And then you're like, man, am I losing my mind here? Am I doing the right stuff? And then it just, you'll have like a little thing or two where you're like, okay, I'm doing what I need to be doing here or whatever. But
dude, it's like you could tell you've been there because like you're saying all the stuff that happened to me. You know what I mean? It's like I would get just like a morsel of a crumb on like a day after like 3 days of just getting my teeth kicked in. You know what I mean? It'd be like, oh man, okay, yeah. I was right. You know what I mean? It's like, and it was enough to keep me going like 3 more days. You know what I mean? Until like I got that next little morsel. But dude, how did Iowa end up playing out? How did you do?
It was good. I mean, I killed a really good buck. And I'm not gonna, say it wasn't like I'm happy with the deer, but
right.
I had it was an upper 150s buck. I had really high expectations. I really, had Boone and Crockett on, my mind going there. And I had just the wildest, craziest season ever. And I really didn't want to fill a tag like right off the bat either because I wanted to have the whole experience. Like, I'm right on the cusp of moving to Iowa now. Like,
oh, are you really?
Yeah,
Nice.
I'm serious. Like, my parents probably wouldn't like that very much, but I mean, it's not that it's far away, but
right.
Yeah, it was such an awesome experience, and I actually shot a really big deer that I didn't find on November 8th, which I'm still going to be looking for that deer. I mean, I've been looking forever. I still have a few cameras in Iowa, and I got a picture maybe a week or two ago of a deer that looked kind of similar to the one that I shot. And it looks like there's like I won't ever believe that deer has to be dead, but yeah, it was great. I mean, it was a little slow starting off.
Did you hunt there a good bit? Did you start hunting in October, like when it opened?
Yeah. I wish I could have hunted. It's open like in the middle of the week, so I couldn't hunt,
right.
Right away. But October 1st was like a killer day to be in the woods. And so I hunted that opening weekend, and I hunted in a bottom. And it's a really cool spot. It's like one of the few spots I have ever come across where every time I went there, like when I scouted it in the last year in the spring, I was always checking the wind, and it was like it's like a vacuum. Like everything just gets sucked right out of that bottom. It's wild, and on any wind. But those big bucks were pretty much in there only on a northwest, and I hunted it. It was a red moon, October 6th, I believe it was, and I had one of the bucks I was after. He was like maybe a 160. He came through that bottom with like a really big mature 8-pointer, and they kind of skirted this scrape. I had a doe kind of get like weird, and they knew something was kind of wrong. They went through the whole bottom and then like went out to like the mouth of the drainage, and then they were at like 45 or 50 yards. I couldn't get a shot at them. They came back right to me. And I had like a few minutes of shooting light left, but in that, the canopy and everything, like I couldn't tell which buck was which. Like that 8-pointer, I didn't want to shoot that buck, but the other buck I definitely wanted to shoot, and I was at full draw twice on him. And I had a camera in that bottom as well, and I thought the 8-pointer was actually the buck that I wanted to kill, and I was so close to releasing an arrow. and then I let him go, and that 8-pointer walked over to that camera, and the deer were flip-flopped. I would have shot the wrong deer, so it was
Yeah.
so it started off good, and then
Right. Yeah, it's a great way to start. Have two great encounter, right?
yeah,
So,
right off the bat. Then it was like a little slow. All like the really good weather and stuff we had was always during the week, and it just sucked, and then it'd be like 75 or 80 degrees like on the weekends, and
yeah.
but then like going into Halloween, it was great. So I took a pretty good amount of time like off work, like any chance I got, pretty much I was bouncing out of there. And on November 1st, I saw my first, no doubt, 200-inch deer, like mega buck. And I already knew like there's that deer what came deep out of some private, like I could tell. And
he had manicured hooves and like, no, right.
it was such a cool experience though. Like,
yeah.
I had to run a camera on that place all year, and there was almost no bucks on the place at all.
Wow.
And then it's like they all just like came out of the woodwork, and there were so many bucks in there. And I had never got a picture of that 200-incher. I mean, he had split G2s and G3s on both sides. He was like a mainframe 5x5. Like mega buck.
Dude, 200-inch at a mainframe 5x5 is mega.
Like he would have been like a gross. He was like a no doubt like just crazy big.
How close? Like, I mean, how many yards was he?
Yards.
Man, that's close though.
I hunted with a buddy. He wanted to come along, and we were just gonna do like one hunt together. And we hunted in a bottom on Halloween. And it was like rainy and like crappy, and it was so cold. And we left there, and then I hunted somewhere else like in the evening. But the next morning, so that was November 1st, that mega giant buck literally walked directly underneath the tree that we sat in the morning prior.
Oh.
And so there was like a lot of really big bucks on that place, like 150 to like 165, and
right.
Every single one of those bucks was following. It was like a train. It was so crazy. Like there's so many deer, and like none of those deer wanted to challenge that buck at all. And there's like this really old, gnarly, like crazy. He has like crazy mass. He's in the 160s for sure, and like kickers all over the place. And he just kept snort wheezing at that giant, and he, for like 1 second, he left that doe, and like he tried to put his antlers like right into his guts, and he like pushed him right into the ditch, and that buck like just turned around and just walked the opposite direction, wanted nothing to do with it.
Yeah, cauliflower ear, huh?
Yeah.
He had a crooked nose.
Yeah, he was a cauliflower ear buck. But it was, I knew immediately what that buck was doing with that doe. Like he must have done that every single rut of his entire life. Like there's a road and some houses and stuff over there, and like when he was like pushing that doe through that bottom, like his brisket was touching that doe's tail like the entire time they were walking. It was like a straight, they never broke stride, and he pushed her right up to that house in like the road, because it was a north wind, so the wind was blowing directly at that road and that house. Like he must have done that so many times where there's so many deer there, so many bucks there. He knows there is zero chance any of those bucks are going to ever smell that doe, like unless they're standing in the guy's living room,
Right.
And
wow.
it kind of screwed him that day, because the wind, like it's so rare to have a wind switch like that. It switched from north to south. So I knew like there's going to be a ton of bucks that are going to be able to smell that doe like in the right spot there. And I had a really good evening hunt there. I let a really nice buck. He's probably like upper one, probably about as big as the one that I killed. I let him walk 3 times during the day, and then I was about to climb down, had all my stuff ready like for that next morning, and a buck, like he just comes right underneath the tree, and I had like flipped my headlamp on and like lit up the entire woods, and like they acted like I wasn't even there, and it was like such a cool experience. Actually, one of like, the coolest experiences I had.
That's awesome. That's awesome, dude. Especially like when you get to have like that close of an encounter. Like that was I think my favorite part, and I want to get back to like how you ended up killing this deer. My favorite part, I think, of the entire Iowa hunt that I had, because I ended up being able to be there for 2 weeks straight, and it was like getting a master class on mature buck behavior. Because in Pennsylvania, we just don't have a ton of mature deer. They're not around every corner, right? Like specifically the area that I live in, 3.5-year-old deer is like top of like the age structure for the most part. You occasionally get a 4.5, and like the wildest of dreams, you'll get a 5.5. You know what I mean? But by and large, you're going to see a lot of 3.5s and rarely a 4.5, right? Go to the north place where I hunt. There you can with some consistency find 4.5 to like 6.5-year-old deer. Like you can find 4.5 and 5.5-year-old deer pretty frequently. Not a bunch of them, but you can find them. But when I was in Iowa, so it's like, to get those encounters with that age class of deer, to really start to see them, understand them, know how they want to behave, because they act different, And when I went to Iowa, just like seeing that many mature deer within 2 weeks, I was like, it would have taken me 10 years of hunting in Pennsylvania to see that many mature deer in that amount of time,
That's something like I wanted to bring up too. Like you're at such a huge advantage living in places like that. Like in Wisconsin, we have a lot of big mature deer too, especially like in western Wisconsin in the hills. And I agree, like they're a totally different animal than they do things totally different than other deer. So like if you're from like say Michigan or whatever, like some of these, in the South or whatever, where like deer you don't have an age structure like that, you're not going to learn how to hunt big deer because you don't have them.
Yeah.
So that's tough. Like you can't, like a lot of these guys, I mean, what you like see on TV or what maybe you can learn from other guys, but other than that, like you have no history with seeing big deer and knowing what to do in certain scenarios and stuff like that.
Because they just do the most, like it's seemingly off the wall stuff, but once you have spent enough time around them, you start to see that they all kind of do the seemingly odd stuff. They all do it. You know what I mean? It's not, and it's just that group of age class of deer that do it because they just don't live and behave. Like the biggest thing I've noticed was just as they get older, at least the ones I've been able to watch with some like consistency, like year over year, is that they just become way more isolated. Like even during the summer, like I oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes the more mature deer, it's like I don't even see them in bachelor groups in the summer.
Yeah.
Like they're still by themselves,
Yeah.
And so you have
they're so weird too.
And so it's like when you start thinking about hunting them, it's like you can't necessarily hunt them where other deer are going to be. You have to hunt them almost like where you think deer aren't going to be. It's like
a huge learning thing, like for those deer too. Like, I think, like some of the mature like bucks that get to live like till really old, like a lot of that I think has to do with the bachelor groups that they like grew up in. Like there, a lot of times those bachelor groups, you see like a group of like 4 spikes or like a bunch of 3-year-olds. Sometimes you'll have a bachelor group with like a few giant old mature bucks all the way down to like some little yearlings or whatever. Like they're all different. Or sometimes it'll just be like 2 big mature bucks by themselves. And like that's where they learn, a lot of these things they have to luck into like their first few years on like survival things, and then they start to like put more things together on like how to survive different scenarios and stuff. And a lot of that I think they learn, you watch them like in the summertime and they're watching everything like that big buck does, it's like a little kid, he's paying attention. So a lot of times you can like look back and be like, oh yeah, that buck was always bachelored up as a 2-year-old, like with that other giant that's long since dead, but like I wonder if he's going down to that river bottom where that other giant was like years ago, and like that's where he's like going like during gun hunting or whatever. Like those things are just learned. Like they have them. They might not ever like go to those places unless they absolutely have to. But it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, they're interesting creatures, man. Like once you get the taste for them, I guess, if you will, right? And you get to spend some time around some of them. It's like nothing can beat it. It's like there's
they're really more simple.
They are.
Like, it's actually really simple, like, how to like hunt them and stuff, but like it's not though. Like at the same time, like
It's easy to figure out where kind of like in general where they want to be, right?
yeah,
But they just don't make very many mistakes to tell you exactly how you need to do it.
yeah,
That's the part that like is they're going to give you very, very little clues that you have to put together. You know what I
yeah.
mean? And sometimes they don't even seem like the clues don't even seem like they fit together.
Hmm.
It's like and you'll be thinking about it like in the off season, you'd be like, oh man, a deer beat me again. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute. You know what I mean? It's like you have like an epiphany where it's like,
Yeah.
and it's
It
like,
could be
no,
like
that's
first light. It could be like first light, and the deer could like blow an air horn every morning at 7 a.m. and like still that deer ain't gonna get killed though, because
yeah.
like over time he has spots where I mean he
Hmm.
could literally close his eyes and go to sleep, and there is no chance. Like everything has to be perfect to kill that deer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean
So
that's why
anyway,
the
go.
structure in those places is like that because
Yeah.
it offers them survivability and stuff.
Yeah. And going back to what you were, what we were both saying, which is like, man, it's hard to hunt those old big deer, if you're not around them. It's
Hmm.
like it's like a guy going from just PA, right? And he got lucky, or not lucky, but he's fortunate. He's got his first Iowa tag and he's going to go to Iowa, and he wants to kill an Iowa giant, right? It's like, dude, that is going to be a hard nut to crack. You know what I mean? Especially if you've spent most of your life chasing 2.5 and 3 year olds,
Yeah.
like going to Iowa and trying to kill like a 5.5 year old deer. Like just because it's Iowa, like you might see them, but they're still not stupid. You know what I mean? Like they're still not an easy animal to kill.
Yeah.
You know?
There are times like where the hill, like in some of these hills, it can be you can it can test your mental and physical ability and everything. But there are times where I think they are so vulnerable, like during the rut, especially like midday. That's something that I did a little bit more this year. Like if I had a little bit of time, like I would rather hunt like 10 to like 2 because
Mm,
like those giants they're up cruising like on the tops in places like that. That's the only place that they can be to smell those. So especially like on a little bit calmer days where it's like 5 to 10 mile an hour winds, where like a lot of those does are bedded up high. Like those bucks have to be up there to smell those does. There's nowhere else that they can smell them.
yeah.
And if you're like up on, those ridges, especially like where one side of the ridge has like a sharp, it's really super steep and you're like right on that edge, like you're invincible. There is no way that you're going to get cracked there.
Hmm.
And they think that they are bulletproof up there because they can smell everything being on the top and they're not. And
Yeah.
that's like the chance to kill like some of those giant bucks. Because
Yeah.
they would rather be out searching like when all those does are bedded up anyways. Like
Yeah.
a lot of times they're bedded like at first light where they're just waiting for those does to get to the bedding areas and stuff, and then they're moving.
Yeah. I mean, they've played the game long enough, right? It's like you'll see
Mhm.
like the 2 and 3 year olds running, like they'll run to the tail until their tongues fall
Yeah.
off, right? But those older deer, it's like, I mean, if you think about it, if you were doing it, right? It's like
Hmm.
I was talking to someone about this the one day, because it's always cool when you see things that to be true to actually happen, like in front of you, like where you
Yeah.
get to watch it.
Yeah.
You know
I
what I mean?
agree.
And so, just as an example, it's like, and I was explaining this I ran into someone, they were a little bit of a newer hunter, and we were kind of talking about, I forget exactly what, but I was talking about, essentially what we're talking about and how like older deer are going to make the job easier for themselves. Right. And I was like, hey, just take the example of like a food source and like a field, for example. I was like, let's just make it simple. I was like, where does typically will go into a field like perpendicular, like you can always find those trails that they're using or the most of the deer are using because they're beaten down. You can see exactly how they're entering into fields, et cetera. Right. I was like, if it's during the rut or pre-rut or whatever, I was like, you're not going to find a buck that's going to like walk any of those trails right into that field. I was like, what you'll find is like, you'll find the buck actually perpendicularing all those trails because he can basically do a loop around that field and know if any doe that ever walked into that field today is hot or not. I was like, and so he doesn't have to go chase every doe. He just has to make a loop, a lot more efficient for him. Right. And so I gave that example. And then I was like, I was actually down scouting in November. I got out of my tree and I was like, I need to go like, I need to go shake some stuff up. I was having a hunt where I was like, I didn't think I was seeing what I should see. So I was like, I'm going to get down and do some moving. Got down, was going through this area where I was like, oh, I have a camera not far from here. I was like, I'm just going to go check that. And it was like across this swamp, and there was a ridge that was there. And as I'm checking that camera, I hear it coming, and I'm like, and I just stopped and I'm looking, and it was a young buck, but it was like the same example. It was like he was coming across the top like edge of that ridge, perpendicular, like all the information I have of deer crossing there, cross over this embankment, go up over the ridge and down over like the other side, right, which is like a cliff. It's cliffed out, and they like to bed over there. This deer basically perpendicular to that whole top edge. I just watched him walk along with his nose to the ground because he was basically trying to cut the track of anything that kind of came up and went over, right? And it's just cool to watch them actually do the things that you know that they're supposed to do, you know? And this person was like, wow, I never really thought of it that way. And I'm like, yeah. I was like, well, same thing like at 10 to 2. I was like, mature deer know that those are back to bed. So why would you chase them when you can just wait for them to go to bed and then just go check the bedding areas?
Yeah.
You know, get on the downwind side and bada boom, bada bing, you know if there's a hot doe or not, you know? But
yeah, I think hunting out in the hills, like during the rut, actually, especially like in, you know, like the really steep stuff, I hate to say this, but I actually think it's like actually pretty easy. And I mean, there's so many scenarios that you can put yourself in where it's like you can almost write it down that you're gonna like if you're you know here you have the same wind like 2 days, you're gonna kill one there, like especially like in a place where there's that many big bucks. I mean,
right.
Unless you screw it up, which I did quite a few times, but
right.
Like,
so how did you
can put yourself in a scenario where you're coming up like a straight up, like a freaking wall, pretty much. And like if you like, I hunted on top of a ridge where it looks like it's like really wide open, like in videos and stuff, where it's like, man, I can't believe these deer are up there or whatever. But it's really, there's a lot of deadfalls and stuff, and there's still like a decent amount of bedding up there, and like the deer like being up there where they can see like a long ways and stuff too. Like it's hard, you're not going to go up there midday and think you're going to have like a killer hunt because you're going to bust every deer out of there. But like those bucks are up there, and they just hug it, like the downwind side of that stuff. And like they're almost, think of them as like being blind. They're almost like not even, their eyes are just making sure they don't run into a tree or something. Like they're just head bobbing, like not even looking around, and they're just cutting tracks, and they're just smelling everything that's up there. And it's so easy for them. And if you put yourself like, I don't want to be right tight on that edge, but I still want my wind to just get over that, you know, drop off. You know that those deer aren't going to be, there's nothing that can wind you there. And then if it's calmer and your thermals are just kind of dropping down on top of that deer and he's like hugging that edge, he's going to crack you right when he gets perpendicular. You know, I like to line my ground scent up with where he's going to bust me, so I just have a little bit of like dead space there. And, if the deer you don't want to shoot, he's going to bust you. But, sometimes they'll be, farther on the interior of like a big flat top like that than you thought they were going to be, because they can like bird dog any of those does out that, they might be upwind of them or whatever. So sometimes you're off a little bit, but that's one of my favorite places to hunt. Was a spot that I found on this piece of public in Ohio. It's actually where I killed the deer that I killed in Ohio. And it was a super steep walk up. Same thing you're describing. Like you couldn't hunt it midday. Like you had to get in the morning. It was the only way to really do it. Because as soon as the thermal started rising, right, it was just, I had so many deer walk underneath me on like the prevailing wrong wind. Like I would hunt it on winds that the prevailing wind was like, it was the dead wrong wind to hunt that spot. And I would sit there as soon as the sun come up, man, bulletproof. I mean, I had deer come at me from every possible direction. Never once got busted. It's that feeling to be in a spot like when you're going to have an all day sit, and it's like one of the best days, like a November 6th, 7th, 8th, like this year. November 6th is when I killed that deer. Yeah. That was this year? No, this was, shoot. Yeah, this was a couple years ago. It's probably like 5 or 6 years ago. Pretty much all year this year. Yeah. But it was, that spot was killer, man. I mean, it was one of those places where, I just saw bucks every day, like between 10 and 2. It was like a buck parade. They just kind of roll through, and it was right at the edge of this, like almost like a little spine. Well, it wasn't a spine back. It dropped off the backside. It wasn't super steep off the backside of it, but it was just, there's a big scrape that was there. I knew there was doe bedding at the end of this ridge, and there was doe bedding at the other end of the ridge, and they were just kind of bebopping back and forth between the two, and I was bulletproof
And I ended up killing one. And then I was with a buddy of mine. It was this old timer that I hunt with sometimes. And I was like, just go sit in my tree. Just go sit it. I was like, you'll kill something. I put him in it the next day, and he killed the biggest buck he's ever killed with a bow.
Really?
So yeah, which felt good because he was the one who got me into bow hunting. And I was able to get him on a deer. But I mean, what happened with that with the deer that you killed from Iowa? How'd that play out?
That spot was killer too. So I shot a big deer on November 8th. So I looked on for the next few days for that deer.
Did you shoot that one at the spot we were just talking about previously?
Yeah,
Yeah.
shot
Okay.
that deer. And I shot him at 4 yards.
Wow.
I mean, the arrow was sticking out on both sides of him, blood just pouring out of that deer. I cannot even wrap my mind around. He has to be dead.
Man,
If he
that's
survives,
crazy.
I'll be mind blown. I had to have one lung done,
Hmm.
and
Was it I mean, you were in a tree, of course, right?
yeah, and the angle was.
That's what I was just going to say, like high
It
angle. Like,
looked like when I watched him run and I could see that arrow sticking out both sides. If I might have hit him in the center of the lung on one side and missed his lung on the other side. And
right.
he was quartering to me. I just stopped him before he was going to hit my ground scent. Quartering a little bit, and I put it like right on his shoulder, pretty much. It looked perfect, and then just pouring blood. He went down like straight down, like 400 feet or whatever, and he bedded at the bottom in the river bottom. And we went in there. We got in there like 7 hours after the shot. I mean, I thought the deer was stone dead for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And he must have, he bedded and he's watching his back trail looking straight up at the ridge, and we must have, busted him out of there going into there. He had a few beds, little just specks of blood in the beds, like coming off his hair.
Hmm.
And I looked and looked, and it's thicker than hell in there. And I still I can't believe there's tons of eagles and stuff in that whole river system there, and I found a bunch of dead deer, not my deer, but crazy. So I've still
That's wild, man.
But so then I didn't get back on the horse until I called my boss. I'm like, yep, I'll be back to work tomorrow. I just killed one, and then I'm like, nope, never mind. So I finally hunted again on I think the 11th or 12th. I went in to hang a stand on the 12th. I had an hour of light left, and I was going to sit all day on the 13th. And I was really looking for one. There's a bunch of big deer in there, but one in particular. So I shouldn't have even been in there. I needed a south or southeast wind. It was it's like a skinny ridge. The top is houses and farms and a road and stuff, and then you have a straight cliff face, and then there's all these rock ditches that are crazy steep, and we just don't get a lot of southeast winds. But those bucks are all cruising through. There's a ton of does there. Those bucks are cruising through there. They can smell everything on a southeast wind, and they just hug the edge of that cliff face and cruise for doe. So there's a few those ditches you can go up, climb up those rocks and just get right into a tree and hug that edge. And so that's what I did. I wanted to pick my tree in the daylight, so I picked my tree. I'm just about to put my stand against the tree, and the buck that I was in there for, here he comes cruising through. He's at 55 yards. And that's kind of where I wanted to be. It was out farther, but I'm a lot of these bucks I know and does are probably going to bed right on the edge, and I'm going to get busted, and I want to sit here all day. So I just get my stand to stay up against the tree, and I run down. My bow is hanging from my rope. Go down my sticks, and then the tree that I was in was big, so I'm hiding behind my tree, and I'm I'm going to get everything ready. He's going to be at 100, 120 yards, and I'm going to grunt to him, and maybe he'll come. There's all these giant scrapes right here. I'm he might come right to me. I get ready, and I look around the tree, and he's at 20 yards. I'm oh my God. And he was coming right to me. And he caught movement, and the wind is blowing right off this cliff. And he didn't know what was going on. And then he literally walked 5-6 feet away from me. And I had to stare off with this freaking 170 incher. and he like faked me out. He like turned his back like he was gonna leave, and I tried to draw, and then he turned back. Like, and I'm sitting there like this, and then he blew and took off. It was an absolute disaster, and I climbed up my sticks, and I'm like, well, I have a little bit of time to hunt tonight. I climbing up my sticks, and before I even get on my stand that's not even set up yet, there's another buck standing there. I'm like, what the hell is going on? I'm like, this is crazy. Just like a little buck, but so then the next day I'm like, this sucks because I know there is zero chance that buck, that big one, is gonna come by this tree. Like I scared the living daylights out of him.
Yeah.
And but it was still like a good setup. Well, I had a good hunt, saw like a lot of bucks on the 13th, and then that big one that I saw the day prior, he comes rolling through on the same trail that he originally was on the day before. His like tongue was hanging out, like he was smoked.
Mm-hmm.
And I grunted to him, and he didn't want nothing to do with it. And then like right behind him, there was a big mature buck. He had like a split, like a big fork G2 and a split brow, and he really didn't look that good to me at first. And I didn't even take my bow off the hanger. And I'm like, I'm gonna let him go. And then he gets to like 10 yards. I'm like, damn, the deer's way bigger than I thought, and like, huge body deer.
Mm-hmm.
And like one of the main trails, like directly underneath the tree. I took my bow off the hanger, and then I never made a shot like this before, where my arrow wasn't even like touching my wrist. I was literally looking straight down.
Wow.
And I shot him like right between the shoulder blades. And I mean, he was just stone, like he went like 40 yards and was just stone dead.
Nice.
So yeah, it was super cool.
That's awesome, man.
Great,
Dude, that big buck gave you the old okey doke.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. I mean, it's not hilarious, but like you can find the humor in it now, where he was like
so cool though, like just being like super wide buck too, like right up in my grill. I'm like, dude, this thing literally, he could kill me right now if he wanted to, probably.
Isn't it crazy how like when you're getting that close, like how, in hindsight you think about it, you think, man, if this deer just realized that all he has to do is run at me and I'm screwed, you know?
It would have been so cool if I would have just caught like a little bit of him, like looked around the tree and didn't just like look quick, like, and I knew he was like coming right to me. I could have easily drawn behind that tree, and if I was, sitting there at full draw, like I would have smoked that deer like right, point blank, and it would have been the coolest thing. But
how close was he whenever he okey doked you? Well, how far
he
away
was literally like within 5 yards of me, like one of the closest I've been to like a giant deer like that.
Right.
Actually, I had several of those this year that were the deer I shot on November 8th. I was in my boxers and putting my long johns on in the morning. I thought it was so funny too. I'm like, here comes, like, it's just crazy during the rut. Like, I know where all these bucks are going to be up on this ridge. I have a little spike. He comes right behind me, and I'm like putting my stuff on, and I'm like, oh my God. And like he just tears out of there. Then he was at like 10 yards. Right after that spike took off, I hear another deer. I'm like, oh my God. I turn around, and it's this freaking just slammer of a buck. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, it's not funny anymore. No, that's freaking terrible. I believe that was the deer that I ended up shooting on November 8th.
Okay.
But yeah, I had so many just crazy things happen to me where.
That's wild, man.
Yeah.
But dude, that's I mean, it's a bummer you didn't find the first deer, right? Like we always, lament the ones that we don't find, of course, right? But man, that's such a great experience, man, that you had, being able just to spend that amount of time around mature deer of that caliber, that close, that often. Like that's just, I mean, that it just sounds like a blast, man. You know what I mean? Like that's what you go to Iowa for that, right? Like
awesome.
that's what you go for, is for those experiences.
Yeah, I couldn't have asked for better, and I'm so glad that, that's really sucked with losing that deer or whatever. But just like the whole experience, I'm so glad that it worked out like that, where I got to go through. I would be fine. I was totally fine eating a tag too in Iowa. Like I totally fine. Like I would have. I would love to be still hunting right now. Like, I mean, I wish I could, but
do you like the late season? Is that like, do you enjoy hunting late season?
It's tough. It's really tough. but it can be really, really, really good too.
Mm-hmm. What's your favorite time of year to hunt? Like what part of the season do you
Late
prefer?
October for sure.
Late October.
I love like the third, from like the 20th to November 1st is just so good. I love that time. We had kind of really, really crappy weather this year at that time, but
Yeah.
that's usually you know, I probably would have taken vacation at that time if we had decent, weather and stuff at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. How was Wisconsin this year?
Good. I did run cameras and did, a little bit of scouting on the stuff that I knew, and I had to keep telling myself like, don't waste like you have this Iowa tag.
So
Like,
you kind of pushed all your chips to the
I'm
center
gonna go do some
to
stuff in Wisconsin. I'm like, no, don't
yeah.
like spend every little bit of time you have in Iowa.
Yeah.
Um, but I did get to actually, so it's opening Wisconsin's gun season. Um, it was the 23rd, I think, was opening day, and on the 24th, which I bow hunt during our gun season,
Mm-hmm.
I shot one of the biggest deer I've shot in my life,
Hmm.
probably upper 170s buck,
Nice.
like a mega buck.
Nice.
And he actually, this is so crazy. So it was like 10:30 in the morning. I just had like literally a parade of deer. I don't know if they drove it out they came from like the strangest direction, but um, that had this giant buck come with like there's all these other bucks and like a couple of does. One of these like doe fawns, I believe, was in heat, and at 37 yards, I kind of leaned out on my stand to get a shot at this buck. I stopped him and I diced him like right in his brisket. I watched that arrow hit him, and I didn't know if I caught an artery off his heart. I know it was like super low, but I'm like that deer. He went over the hill. I'm like he could be stone dead there.
Mm-hmm.
And right after that, maybe 5 minutes later, like one of the biggest 8 pointers I have ever seen in my life, like mega 8 pointer, talking like a deer of a lifetime, comes down that same trail, and then he was like chasing a doe around. I had him within 20 yards of me so many times, and like it was so hard not to shoot that deer. I'm like, I can't be up here with these two giant dead bucks. Like, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't think I killed that deer. I think I barely just grazed him. I'm not sure, but he might be dead.
Right.
And I got some really cool footage of him and stuff, which was cool. And then I get down like 3 hours later. I'm like, that deer's he's gonna be dead there, or he's gonna be totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
And there was like blood everywhere. I'm like, shit, maybe he is dead. I'm
Right.
like, but I know he's gonna bleed a lot there. And I jump up some deer on the end of this point, and I'm looking at my binos. I see like a huge buck. It's that mega 8 pointer. And it's like scanned to my right, and the deer I shot was standing right there. They're like posturing up to each other and stuff. I'm like, oh my God. And I could see like where I hit him, and I actually got like a tiny bit of footage of him. He had like his skin was like hanging down like there, and it was just like I just like cut him open. He was bleeding bad, but
Right.
he was
Nothing vital. Yeah.
totally fine. And it like made me actually like physically sick letting that 8 pointer walk. I'm talking like that deer was crazy big.
Damn, dude. So you still have it? You're still holding the tag then for Wisconsin right now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel
Okay.
very confident about. I'm gonna hunt like probably one more time.
Well, I saw you. I was following along with your. I think it was a story that you did. Like there was a spot you hunted in the morning. This deer should be bedded in that spot.
Oh,
You were
yeah,
said it's like a
that's
ridiculous. You were like, it's a ridiculous freaking spot. I can't believe I'm hunting it.
Yeah, that's just like a crazy thing that really threw me for a loop. I'm usually always like thinking outside the box and like what some of these deer are doing and stuff, and like he really threw me for a loop where there's a few like giant deer that live on this place, and it's like in the strangest place. There's like houses all over the place, and like this deer lives across this road on private most of the time. So I thought I'd never got a daylight picture of him in a few years, and he walked by a camera at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I happened to hunt. I don't get service or anything there. It's just a regular camera. I hunted there. We had snow on the ground, and I went back there at like 9 o'clock at night. I'm like, why would I not go follow this deer around and see exactly what he did? Like everything he did was in the daylight. So I follow this deer around, and he's literally had been bedding by this, right next to this person's house. I'm talking like right next to his window. It's crazy. His grass is like private, and that's it. Everything around it is public. And so like where you access this property is like 50 yards from that house. So he's living like in this tiny patch in between the access, like where you park, and this person's house. And it's really like a perfect scenario for the deer. All of his beds up there were for like a west or a northwest. Perfect scenario because anyone pulls him in the parking lot, he just like stands up and walks away. And then you dip right down in the bottom. And I blew the place apart when I was following him around and stuff, but that was like, I thought maybe it would be enough time for him to
come back,
go back in there. And I don't think he's doing it all the time, but I gave him a shot and 2 mornings, and it didn't. He wasn't in there. So
no.
But I do have a couple bucks where, I mean, I am so confident that if I don't get one of these 2 deer killed on Thursday, it's probably something that I did, just majorly screw it up, or I get picked off by a different deer or something, or somehow I get winded.
Right.
But, I don't know.
Nice.
I mean,
man.
they're standing there right now, so
yeah, nice, dude. I look forward to that grip and grin, man. I got confidence in you.
If it doesn't happen, I'm not too. It's not a big deal, but
right, yeah, it's as long as you don't get bit by any coyotes between now and then, dude. Because I saw that video of you grabbing that coyote, dude. Like that was my introduction to you. Was I was talking with Ty Jennings. And I had him on the show. And we were just kind of BSing afterwards. He asked me if I knew you, and I said no. I was like, the name sounds familiar. I was like, but I don't know him. And he's like, man, you should have him on, And I was like, great. So he was like, he's a killer. He's like good dude. Kills mature deer, like great hunter, and just he was like, he's a good guy. And those are the type of guys I like to have on, just like regular guys that like to get after it, And so I was like, I started following you and was like looking through your stuff, and I see the one where you grab the coyote by the neck, and I was like, oh yeah, gotta talk to this guy. He's just the right kind of crazy I like, you know what I mean? So
yeah, dude, a lot of people thought I was like so wild,
dude. It was wild, man. So like, do you trap a lot? Like, is that just like, or is it just kind of like for kicks, like once in a while? Or is it something you're pretty into?
I've been trapping for like 6 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Usually I'm, like last year I was started at this time, but usually I'll trap for like 3 weeks to like a month or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I'll probably start here soon. It goes until like around Valentine's Day, so I have a little bit of time, but
yeah. Nice.
So,
yeah.
it's fun. I learned,
I was just going to say, man, like
so much better at deer hunting from trapping, like night and day, like difference.
What has helped you? Cause like, it's not like that. So that's what I was going to ask you next, actually. It's because most of the guys that I've had on that were trappers or trapped like in their past, and maybe they don't trap actively now. Maybe it's something they did like when they were a kid growing up, or like, running, coon dogs or whatever. Like I feel like guys that do those types of things, like just have a different lens of the woods, and they're just like a little bit more tuned into like the nuance that helps them in their bow hunting. Like, what is it with trapping for you that kind of translates?
I agree with that. Just like picking up on sign, and actually I just ran into a trapper in Iowa like a month ago, and this guy was so dialed in too. Like he could tell me every tree in this freaking place, and like he such a good woodsman, and I love talking to guys like that. He was around my age, probably mid 30s or whatever. And but yeah, just like everything is like on a really small level when you're trapping coyotes, and coyotes are like crazy,
crafty,
weird animals, like, and they will kick your butt. Like, you think, I don't like when people say deer are smart, because I don't think that they are smart at all. I think they're just they're so tuned into their surroundings and have such awesome instincts. But coyotes I think they have the ability to reason, and they will mess with you and do weird stuff, and they're a strange animal. But yeah, the sign is like on a very small level. Like everything is small scale, but like huge scale too, because they travel super long distances. So you're looking at like when you're looking at travel routes and looking at maps, you're thinking like they're straight line travelers. Like they'll travel long edges or long roads or frozen creeks or stuff like that. But just picking up on sign, especially like when you're snaring and you're looking at tracks in the snow, um, like different types of snow, like melted out snow and like deep powder, and you're like having to look at, you're trying not to catch deer, and like trying to be on the right trails, and how they travel just like in accordance with the wind. Like a lot of times it's like small scale stuff where they just want to smell like a brushy fence line or whatever, and like how they're flushing game to each other and stuff like that. I don't know. You just learn so much,
Yeah, well, that is like snaring. It's like you're trying to get them to put their foot in something like that big. You know what I mean?
Their head
or their head, right? Yeah. It's like I'm sure that helps with bow hunting, where you go from being in the right area to being in the right tree.
Yeah.
It's like that. There's a big difference.
My buddy all the time. I'm like, dude, I know right now I can snare this buck tonight.
Right.
I don't know if I can shoot him tomorrow. Like if I have a big enough snare and he could get his head through there, I know I would catch him.
Right. That's awesome, man. Yeah. I mean, it's because like that's one of the things. Like for me, I think, I'm always trying to get better at something every year. You know what I mean? Trying to, last year I was supposed to, use a trad bow more often. And my season's not over yet. It's like I might get out like one or two more times. Maybe we'll see how like the family schedule plays out and stuff like that. If I can get out to use the longbow, but that was my goal, and it didn't happen because I wanted to chase this one deer, and I wasn't gonna miss an opportunity at this particular deer because I had a 20-yard max range, type of situation, But in the future, it's like it won't matter because it's probably going to be the weapon of choice regardless. But so for me, it's like being more conscious now about setups and like, trying to make sure I'm getting closer, like as I possibly can. Like not like, is the deer going to be in this area? It's like, no, I want the deer to be here, right? Because I'm going from having, typically in the woods, it's like I don't want to shoot any further than 30 yards. It's kind of like all the further, in most of the places I hunt, like you can't really get a shot much further than that, if even that. But now I'm going from that to max 20 yards, right? And ideally 15. You know what I mean?
You become a way better hunter when you have to constantly think like that. That's like almost like the mindset of like a lot of guys they bow hunted all year, and then all of a sudden gun hunting comes and they totally hunt like a totally different way because they have a gun in their hands, when really the deer are in the thickest stuff. You should be hunting even more. You should be hunting like you have a traditional bow in your hands instead of a rifle,
Yeah. Exactly. So that's my thing for this year, is to like continue to get better at, shooting my longbow, right? Just continue to be as proficient as I can with that. And then just as I'm scouting, being more mindful of like the setups and stuff like that, to where it's like the setup that would maybe be good for a compound setup, it's like it's not going to necessarily work for me anymore. It's like I'm going to have to tweak stuff and, and maybe have to hunt off the ground a lot more just so I can be where I need to be,
How high up in a tree is like the ideal height for...
I don't hunt very high anyway. Even with a compound, like I'm typically not any higher than like 10 or 12 feet, unless there's like a reason that I need to like I can't be too low, but there's a branch here and I need to get above this branch. And so then it's like, I'll climb higher if I need to or whatever. Yeah. But typically it's like, I don't like to be that high off the ground. Not for, not scared of heights or anything like that. It's just, I find that when I climb too high, I feel like I get skylit more often. I get picked off, where if I stay in that like 10 to 12 foot range, or even 8 to 12 foot range, I feel like I have enough cover around me and behind me that my breakup is good, So
yeah, there's not that many people that even think about that. They just go to a certain height, and that's as high as they can go with their setup or whatever. No one's even like thinking about like the cover, and that's all that matters really, especially in the late season, like the lower. I hunt real low in the late season. It's hard to, you might get picked off if you're moving around and stuff a lot easier, but I mean, you have way more cover and stuff.
Yeah. I always kind of just say it's like I climb the first cover. You know what I mean? Like the where
Yeah.
it's like I feel like I'm most concealed. Like I don't go any further than that. You know
Only
what I
time
mean?
like I hunted higher than I ever have on quite a few hunts this year in Iowa, only because I had to get my wind to do certain things, and I just
Right.
the nature of where I was, some of the spots I hunted where I'm like, dang, this didn't work, but I'm gonna hunt a couple of trees over, and I'm gonna bring another stick with me tomorrow, and then I can get up higher and make this work.
Yeah.
So,
I've really learned to enjoy hunting off the ground too. Like I really like if I could hunt only one way, you know, in Pennsylvania, like there's a lot of places where it's like being in the tree is just the best option because of like the terrain and stuff like that, right? But I do really enjoy being on the ground just because I'm able to move. If I see something happen, it's like I don't have to get down and like pack up and move. It's like I can just like go to where I need to be, you know?
you feel like so free,
Yeah.
you have nothing but, especially if you had a stick bowl with you, how cool is that?
That's just it. It's so light, dude. It's like there's nothing to it, you know. It's and I always feel like there's something to be said for like confidence and how you feel when you're hunting, right? When I'm on the ground, like I feel like I'm 2 seconds away from being in the game at any moment, right?
Windy day, I love it. Where
Yeah,
I feel like I can just see something and get to it and run, like set up,
yeah.
and that's awesome.
And you take away, yeah. Well, that and like the other thing too is like some of the spots where I was hunting this deer this year, it was just it was so thick where I was gonna have such limited shooting in a tree that I wasn't gonna be able to get that high anyway. I was gonna only be able to get maybe like 8 feet off the ground, like if that. And in doing that, it's like I might have a lane here and I might have a lane here, and they're both to 15 yards, and that's it, right? Where it's like if I just stayed on the ground, I had way more shooting options, and I could actually shoot a little further. Yeah, because everything was like, just say like head high, like roughly, like all the cover was like around that height. You know what I mean? To where it's like if I could get below it, I actually could probably shoot like 30 yards in some instances, right? But if I got up above it, it's like, man, I could probably only shoot like 10 to 15, and I probably only had 2 spots that I could make a shot, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you're more likely to get picked off by that deer or whatever, but you're still, at least you can shoot them,
Yeah, yeah.
As long as
And
you see him first or whatever, and then
right, and it was so crunchy where I was like, man, I'm going to hear him from a mile away if he's coming, and so I'll know that deer are coming. That, and I was in a ghillie jacket too, so I always use that any time I'm on the ground. Like I don't know. It's like I feel like it's like my wife and daughter are big Harry Potter fans, so I've seen like every freaking movie. I've been to Harry Potter World because we took my daughter on a vacation there when she was little. So I feel like the ghillie jacket is actually like my invisibility cloak. Like like when I'm in it, I feel like I can. Like again, it's a confidence thing where it's like I feel like I can get away with shit. You know what I mean? Yeah, depending on the setup too, I feel like sometimes I can get away with a little bit more noise too, especially if I'm in an area that has foliage, because like the ground cover, like grass and stuff like that's actually going to like be a buffer of my sound, so I can get away with just like a little bit more shifting and stuff like that, like to get set up for a shot. But yeah, I like it, that, and I just love being on the ground. Well, you like the experience you had this year, you know what I mean? Like when you're on the ground at eye level with like a Magnum, it's like there's nothing beats it,
Even with like a little buck or a doe or whatever, like the whole everything is like so much more intense. And then when you do have like deer like come by and you're trying to let them go, and you're like, just get wait, you're like close. That happened to me just, was it last night or 2 nights ago? I was like literally 5 feet off the ground. And this little tiny, like weird looking 4-pointer came in, and he like hung around. I could not believe he did. He was right. I could have reached out with my foot and tapped him on the head, and
That's
he
hilarious.
did not look at me. And I just, at one point, I was like glued to the tree, and I just closed my eyes because I thought,
if I can't see him, he can't see me.
I could not believe that he never busted me. But it's
awesome.
so, just that little buck, it's just so cool, so intense right there.
Yeah, it's because that one hunt I did for that deer, I actually had, I had my antlers with me for that ground setup, and I had a decoy with me, and I've taken to decoying, especially if I'm in like open country, but I wanted to try it here because there was some pretty aggressive sign that he had laid down.
Like a big decoy or like a...
No, I just use like a heads up decoy.
Oh, yeah.
I have a little thing that I made for it to like be able to carry it around really, really easily and like stake it into the ground. I basically put it on a piece of plastic electric fence post that has like the spike on the end, on the end of it. It's a step-in fence post essentially. And so I just cut it to size and put the adapter on it with a screw or with a bolt, so I could put the head on it. And then, you know, I really bought it for plain states. That way I can carry it if I see deer, and I can pop it up and just like walk toward them, because like they're kind of like super curious. They'll be like, "What is that?" You know. Then you get to a certain point, you just step it in and you stay behind it. You know. And so I was playing with it last year before I killed the buck that I killed in the plains. And I actually decoyed it at like an 8-point in from like, I don't even know, like 60 yards away. And I mean, I could have reached out and like pushed him with my bow. Like, you know what I mean? And he was like sniffing, and like he didn't know what it was. And because my buddy uses it, like he's killed megas with it. Like he's killed some like Boone and Crockett deer using it pretty consistently. And so I was like, I wonder how much I can get away with. So it was cool because I kind of used that deer as like a trial run. I wanted to see what I could get away with for movement, because that was my big concern before I used it. Is I was asking him, like, dude, how much movement and how are you getting drawn? And I've watched his videos because he self-films with it and stuff on the ground too. And so I've watched, I was like, man, I feel like you're getting away with a lot of movement on the ground, man. I was like, I don't know if I can get away with that. And he's like, dude, they see that decoy, they're so bewildered by there being a deer right in front of them. He was like, that they think, he's like, at least, he's like, my thought is that they think the movement, as long as you stay next to the decoy and close, that they think it's just the movement of the deer. And I was like, So whenever that deer came close, I mean, whenever I started playing with him, he was probably at 7 yards. And I got off to the side of the decoy where I wasn't even really behind it anymore. I was off to the side of it, and I drew to full draw and just like watched that deer walk around. And he just like kept looking at the deer, move a little closer, and I let my bow down and he walked a little closer. I could have poked him with my bow. You know what I mean? Like, and then finally he got so close, I just kind of like moved again, and he finally recognized me. You know, I was in a ghillie jacket and stuff. And so he finally like got spooky and like jumped, but he only jumped to like 10 yards and stopped and like looked at it again. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I got away with murder with that thing.
I can't believe like some of the stuff that they do. Even like sometimes mature bucks do stuff like that. And I just know, I'm like, dude, a coyote never in a million years would like,
right.
He's a trail, like you get pictures of like a ball of fur turned inside out, like that thing like just sees a little bit of a trail camera and it like just boom, gone. Like
yeah.
They want nothing to do with anything like that. Like
yeah,
they're so different.
I feel like sometimes we underestimate the curiosity of mature bucks or just deer in general. You know, because even if I'm hunting and I have a doe blow at me, especially if I'm on the ground. If a doe blows at me, I'll start making noise, like scuffing my feet, kicking leaves, stuff like that, just so it sounds like there's deer like in the area or whatever. And like, you know, you'd be surprised how many times you do that and a deer blows and other deer show up like, hey, what's going on over here?
Yeah, some of the biggest deer I've killed was right after a deer blows at you, like especially if it's during the rut. Like in Wisconsin, a lot of deer like don't blow during the rut. Like in Iowa, they blow all the time, but like I think I don't know, they don't want bucks that even know where they're at a lot of times.
Right. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, hey, buddy, I don't want to keep you too long. I've kept you here about an hour and a half. I want to be sensitive to your time. But before I let you run out, let people know where they can follow along with you. I know you have a YouTube channel as well, and let them know where they can follow you on Instagram.
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel. I don't really put much like hunting stuff on there. Just like I put usually a shed hunting video or a few on there like every year, and some trapping stuff. I think it's just Tony Van Asten is my YouTube channel.
Yep.
And then I have an Instagram. It's TonyVA3. So put some stuff on there once in a while.
Awesome, man. Well, I hope you kill this deer that's living by that dude's house. I hope you get one of these deer killed here on Thursday.
I think I will.
Yeah, and then send me the grip and grin when that's done. I'd love to see it. I appreciate you coming on, man, and love doing this. Got to get you on again in the future, and keep me posted on whether or not you're going to make that move to Iowa.
Thanks, Paul. I really appreciate it, dude. That was a good time.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you do that for me. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Osseo Gear, Tethered, and Lathrop & Sons Boot Company. And until next time, we'll see y'all.